Welcome back to Bev Boys, your one-stop shop for all your energy drink reviews and, of course, your famous performance talks. I'm Brian,
I'm Christian.
and we, of course, are the Bev Boys. Today was just the dynamic duo. We don't have anybody. We had some rescheduling, so that way we can abide by sporting seasons, because apparently everyone's a coach and has a real job and just doesn't want to do this all the time. So we moved a spectacular episode to next week. So today, congratulations, you get the two of us.
Goddamn right. Yeah, evidently people have real jobs, which is kind of bullshit.
The way God intended.
So, yeah, we're going to be ripping solo dolo, the dynamic duo here today. Definitely make sure you check out our previous episode. We had the whole crew on, Full House, Gabe Mason, Hunter Lakey, Andrew Benham. Definitely talked some shit, but we also talked some shop there as well. If you want to see some funny clips, but also some insightful ones. It was really fun having the boys on. But today it's just us, so I'm going to go ahead and pop top on a white monster here. Classic, you know. Had to do it to him.
Yeah. I'm so mad right now. I wasn't gonna pop any top because I had a coffee, but because you did that.
When has a coffee ever stopped you, Brian? Oh, he's going to the fridge. That's just nonsense. When is having a coffee, and I know Brian, having a coffee or three isn't going to stop him from popping an energy drink if that's what he wants to do. And it shouldn't. If the man wants an energy drink, you have to have an energy drink, especially when it's your whole brand.
Because you did that, I'm gonna double fist it.
I mean, when has that ever stopped you, having a coffee? Like, come on now. If people know you, they know that that's just a bold-faced lie there.
I'm double fisting with another classic, but not the same kind of classic. This is what we call a new American classic. It's Strawberry Lemonade 3D.
Oof.
Screaming cold can.
Oh.
Pathetic kind of on the pop, but it's a lightly carbonated beverage. Yeah, that's great. That's good. It's good. Do you want to talk some shit or you want to talk some shop first?
I feel like the routine is to talk some shit, and that leads into us talking some shop.
That is true.
I mean, I don't think we're very good at doing it the other way around. We have to get all like the stupid shit out in order to dig down to the somewhat intelligent stuff.
That is true. However, we do have some news that is groundbreaking in the industry. A couple different things, actually. From one company, one of our favorite companies, Ghost, they are releasing a couple new flavors of their energy drink. The Blue Raspberry, that'll be released, I believe, in January.
Mm-hmm.
It's an international flavor. It's currently available in Europe. For any of our European viewers, I think we may have two.
Both Brian's athletes.
Yeah. And then they are releasing the blueberry cream, I believe, later this year, before the end of the year, to coincide with their raspberry cream, which did get a review on here. Go back and watch that episode. Raspberry cream is incredible. So I just know blueberry cream is going to also be insane. But they're doing protein bars. And
they are.
I don't want to get too hyped on them, but it looks to be that they have two or three flavors. I have seen two of them for sure. One of them is essentially a chocolate chip cookie dough. And it's weird. It's not weird, but it's different. It's going to be two bars in like a sleeve instead of one total bar. So it's going to be, they're kind of coming together like Kit Kats.
Like a Twix? Oh,
like a Twix, like a Twix or a Kit Kat. Yeah. And there's the cookie dough one, but of course there's the other one that I'm super excited for, which is the chocolate peanut butter one. And it looks like it's going to have a wafer in it. So it's going to be essentially a high protein Nutty Buddy.
Oof.
So you could have a Nutty Buddy. You could Nutty Buddy and then have a Nutty Buddy.
What do you mean by that?
It can mean whatever you want. Nobody knows what it means, but it's provocative. It gets the people going.
That's right. No, I am excited for those. I just saw, cruising through Stack 3D News. First off, I didn't know 5 Hour Energy was still relevant, but apparently they're coming out with a bomb pop flavor. Were you ever into those like energy shots? I never got into those.
I never
It
got
just
into
seemed
them.
like such a waste because like
You
it's
don't
I
enjoy
mean
it.
yeah, like it's a shot. Like you're not supposed to enjoy it. You're supposed to feel something. It's like the
I,
exact same as like an actual shot.
yeah, I feel like the 5 hour energies were for people that were in a bad. Like when you saw somebody pick that up at the gas
Bro,
station,
rough.
they're going through it, man. They're hoping that that thing just saves their life.
Yeah, it was that and oh, when I used to work at Casey's, shout out Casey's. Um, we would have those. They're always like right by the counter, you know. And then they would have those energy pills. Did you ever see
Oh,
those? Sketchy gas station caffeine pills. We had this one called
you
like
sure they were
Red
caffeine?
Dawn. I don't, dude. They could have been. It could have been literally anything. There was one called like Red Dawn. When I saw people pick those up, I was like, oh, this is.
I feel
I
like
want to
you
see a
sold a
day in the
couple.
life, bro. I want to see a day in the life of you. Like,
Yeah,
I
I
want
feel
to see
like you
what you're
sold a
about to
couple
do.
rhinos. You sold a couple rhino pills, if you know what I mean.
Oh, dude, those talk about the weird stuff that gets. I love how they, the stuff is like strategically placed too. It's like always like,
It's
it's like 5 hour energy and like fireball shooters next to
yeah.
right by the register. But
If
there was
you're
like,
if you're picking that duo, you need to seek help
yeah, oh
immediately.
my gosh. I have some wild stories from working there. I didn't even work there for that long, but like, such an interesting I mean working like a retail job I think is like it can provide you a lot of interesting insight and just to like if
Dude,
you have like a somewhat of a plan in your life you feel pretty good about yourself after working like at some of those places and just like dude the people you see and like it's just you just get some bizarre stories from that.
I remember I used to work at Dick's Sporting Goods in college for a little while. I think I worked there for like 8 months. I think it was like my sophomore year. That place was wild because you just don't like. I went into it. I had worked at Adidas before. Loved working at Adidas. That was a sick place. People were pretty normal, in all honesty, at Adidas. I went to Dick's Sporting Goods. That place was the Wild West. I was supposed to work in the shoe department, got moved to cashier, and I was the only cashier like that was ever on during my shifts. So my only friend was the dude who worked at the golf center who was like 30 and lived with his parents still.
Oof.
But he was a nice guy. And then there was a girl that worked in the apparel, like the women's apparel that was like right next to the cashier stuff. So her and I would talk because we were so bored. And then my manager was nuts. I like the store manager loved me. That guy was like, you should try and like become an assistant manager. And I was like, I'm in college and I want to use my degree. And the manager, like the shift manager, she was this like big lady with like a wrist brace on all the time. And I was like dude, I remember the day I quit. So the day I quit, it was my birthday. And I was like, my parents are like, I think it was like my parents were coming up to like see me because my dad's birthday is like right before mine. And I was like, okay, well, I have to go. I'm supposed to work from like 1 to like 6. And I had like 7 p.m. like dinner reservations. And she's like, you need to close. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, you have to close tonight. The other person didn't come. I was like, no, I don't. That's not on me. That's on you. You're the manager. I was like, you didn't fill anybody. And she's like, well, we're a team. You have to play for the team. And I was like, well, you're the captain, so the captain's got to step up. And
Ooh,
I gave her the drawer. I gave her
you
the
were
drawer,
spitting game.
and she was like, so what? You'll get written up. I was like, I'll just quit right now. Fuck it. I was like,
Wow, what a savage.
I was like,
God, that's incredible.
and I came back like 2 weeks later to pick up my last check, and the head store manager is like, he's like, why aren't you on the schedule? And I was like, oh, I quit. And he's like, what do you mean you quit? And I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Wow, what a savage. Yeah, mine wasn't quite as exciting as that, but I would, it's interesting too, because like, everyone has to get gas, like if they drive, and like you're in rural Northeast Iowa working at a gas station. And some Casey's are like the town that I worked in, there was like three different Casey's. There was the one by the highway that was like the bougie one because it was right off the highway. It was like a truck stop connected to a bank. And there was
You had a
another
bank at a
one that
gas
was
station?
it's like connected. It's interesting. Like actually, where I bank, technically it's a credit union, but like,
Still.
um, yeah, it's kind of weird. They're like connected through like a hallway in the same building. I'm sure there's probably some inherent risk to that, but
Yeah.
like it. Why would you
Whatever.
think of that? Yeah, whatever. So damn, it's crazy. Uh, but yeah, and then we were across town, and there was like supposedly we were like the second best one, and the other one was like super sketchy, but like we weren't. I don't know. We were kind of like off the beaten path on the other side of town. Um, and we would. It's so interesting. You would see there's a racetrack in the town not too far. Like people would actually go and like race cars. So like every whatever it was Friday, Saturday night, you would see people like fill up their cars with like that E85 fuel. We would go to the race, and then they would show up again like right before we closed. We would close at like 10. We didn't stay open super late, but they'd come in like 9:30, 9:45, and that was an interesting crowd. Anyone that comes into those stores like after dark, you're in for like you're in for a treat as far as like um
They're not up to
just
normal activities.
exactly. Like I remember yeah, just people. What would also get me is when people. It would honestly make me upset because I just feel like you ever see people that like grocery shop at a gas station, and it's like you're paying like four times as much for all this stuff, right?
That's kind of not like I will say this. Shout out KT Quick Trip. They do have fair price groceries, and the whole
They
point is that
do,
it's like a stop and shop.
but
But
Casey's is not that.
Casey's General Store is a gas station.
Yeah, like you go there for gas and for pizza. Like
Yeah,
don't buy
breakfast
a
pizza.
gallon of milk. Yes, exactly. You don't buy a gallon of milk there. So that the people that would blow like 200 on scratch off tickets,
That's
crazy.
nuts.
And then just go over to like the trash bin, scratch
And
them
they're
off on the
just
top of
scrape
the trash bin,
come
and
right
then take it
back.
back 5 minutes later. And like I'd run them all, and then they do it again. They might do it two or three times. I'm like, this is bizarre. Like
He's like, was that your whole paycheck?
probably it probably was. I had this one guy come in one day, and he was like, "Hey, can I like use your outlet to charge my phone?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And then he like spilled like his not his life story, but like basically how this guy got catfished. He was like, "Yeah, like dude, it was so crazy." He was like, "I like rode my bike and hitchhiked here from South Dakota because I to like meet this girl." And then turned out like she like ghosted me or something. I'm like, "Wow, shocker." Like I didn't say that, but I was like, so what are you? I was like, so what are you gonna do? He's like, I don't know. Like I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna get back home. I'm like, dude, that's insane.
We had a hitchhiker. So after I quit Dick's, I started working at G. After I quit pause.
Pause.
After I quit
Oh,
Dick's Sporting Goods,
there we go. It's better.
I started working at a GNC. And so when I got hired, I got trained in for a day from like this manager, and then she went on maternity leave and just never showed up again, but collected all of her paychecks.
Nice.
So for like 6 months, me and like one other college kid, shout out Cody, he was a dog. Me and him basically managed this store together, and if neither of us could work, we just didn't open. And then the like regional manager was super cool, but he found out and he's like, "Where's your manager?" And we're like, "We have no idea. We just been like trying to keep this place afloat." And he's like, "Well, the numbers are great. Do you guys want to like transfer to a different store?" And like right before we transferred, there was like a month and a half period where they brought in this other guy, and he was a homeless dude who was couch hopping, but he was from like Nevada, and he used to have like a bunch of like don't get me wrong, I'm a tattooed guy. He had like stick and poke needle tattoos that were just weird stuff, and he was telling us stories about how he would train hop. So he'd go to a town, ride like a train, like an actual like cargo train, sitting like in the boxes, and like hop to another town, and he'd explain us like the symbols that the homeless people would like draw on there to be like, oh, the people aren't nice or they're giving or like it's dangerous around here. And this dude was weird. He got fired for coming in like super fucked up on heroin.
Holy.
Dude, it was nuts. But then we went to this other store where my manager was cool there, and then he quit to go. I think he was becoming a banker, which good for him. He should have never been in GNC. That guy knew numbers. We got this like jacked up dude who was on a lot of tests, and he would always sound like he just ate a spoonful of peanut butter. So he'd just talk to you like that, and I'm like, oh, stop eating around me. But then we had, so it was me, this guy, and then I met another friend. Shout out Tyler. Guy just got his DPT certificate or his degree. But so us three like worked together, and this guy went out. And he's like, "We need women in GNC." And I was like, "All right, cool." So we went out and hired like a fitness model from like the gym. This girl never did anything. I trained her in for like 2 days, and then he would like we'd have like an hour overlap on our shifts. This The manager wouldn't show up for my shift, but he would show up for our overlap and sit there and just harass this girl. And then I'd be looking at her and be like, "Do you still like want to work here?" And she's like, "Not really. I kind of thought like it'd just be some fun money and like I could buy some supplements." Then it turns out that this guy was like stealing like protein. This guy was nuts.
The
He was
manager?
Yeah, he was like stealing protein. He's like, "Hey, do you notice like there's a lot of protein going on?" I was like, all I know is like the back stock is getting thrown out, man. Like we if it's expired, we have to take it down to the dumpster, like in the like because we worked in the like in city center. We have to like go down to like this like essentially the bottom like fifth floor of the parking garage where there was like dumpsters, and he would just take it home.
Expired.
Yeah, which I guess is like I mean I don't really care, but it's like a super no go. But between like that like like verbally like harassing, trying to get this girl to like go on a date with him, and then she ended up like starting to date uh one of the other employees, and so we all went out to a concert together. And he found out, and I got interrogated the next day. He's like, "You guys didn't invite me?" I was like, "What?" He's like, "Why didn't you guys invite me?" And I was like, "Because they invited me. I'm not gonna like. That's not how that works, man." And like, he's like, "Well,
I
maybe
didn't get a
I."
+1. Sorry.
Yeah, he was like, "Well, maybe I wanted to go. That looked really fun." And I was like, "You're 38 years old. We were
Oh,
22 at the time, man. Like, we don't want to hang out with you." He was like
yeah.
he was like our Michael Scott, but like not lovable.
Yeah. Just weird. Yeah, that was a weird thing at Casey's too. Like, we had to put new food in the warmer every hour,
Yeah,
and we had to throw everything out if it was. I'm like, dude, like, I can't even take a slice, and they're like, no, you'll get fired if you like. I'm like, what the hell? Like, you make me pay for like I got half off of food to a certain point, but I'm like, it's been there for an hour. I'll eat it. Like, we don't have to
like
throw it out. We should at
it's
least
still
like,
pretty good.
yeah. I'm like, why don't we like give it? I don't know. We just threw it out. Like, sometimes we just throw out a whole pizza. Like, if it was a slow hour and not many people showed up. Um, but that's just kind of how it went. But yeah, I remember one day someone drove away with the gas nozzle still in their truck and just ripped the whole thing off.
Oh my god.
Like, I was just happened to be looking out the window and like just saw this guy rip it off and drive away.
When that happens, does like gas just leak from the tube, or is there like an actual shut off?
No, I think it was a shut off.
Okay. I've always
It was
wondered because
bizarre.
I've seen one like gas nozzle. It was on like the highway, but I didn't. That's not my business, not my problem. I'm minding my own business on that. Like whoever's ripping
Yeah,
that off, I don't want to deal with.
yeah. There was that, and then there was a day where I just came into work. I feel like I've told this story before, but I came into work and our door, like the window to the door, was just plywooded because someone had broken into the store in the middle of the night with a pair of hedge clippers. But the lady, because if you work at Casey's and you're like the person that makes the donuts, you have to show up at like 3 a.m. to make the donuts. And like the donut lady scared him off. Um, so, but yeah, I was just like, oh, what happened? They're like, oh, this.
Career retailers are look, I'm every job is respectable. They're like that's like I'll say that to start, but there are some odd people who are like career retail workers.
Yeah, there
And
are.
it's almost like just like some lack of social skills or something. And look, if you're like high up and like you started working there when you were like young and just kept going, like that's one thing. But like a 40-year-old being like a cashier is a little odd.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's young people, but I remember like it wasn't all that where I worked, and like I worked the cashier. I got to make pizzas a few times, but that was mostly working at like the cashier. The best part was when you make sandwiches because no one goes to Casey's for a sub sandwich. So like
You
you
just
don't really
stand
do
there.
much. Yeah, you just fucking chill out. Um, uh,
Dude, there was I did I was a waiter in a restaurant at an old folks home, like a senior community. And I remember the first day I went to wait tables and I was getting trained in by one of my teammates from playing college football. And an old person was like, "Well, they said we don't have to tip here, so we're not tipping." And I was like, "Oh, it's one of those things." And then I saw we had one old lady that would get she had like like we would get like a list basically from the nurses and be like, don't feed them this, don't feed them this. And hers just said like she only gets 2 glasses of wine.
oh,
Cause like and then like someone forgot like that she wasn't supposed to get that. And she just kept getting it, but she gets hammered. And she like stood up and she came in hammered one day, like already drinking with like no pants on, just a diaper. And like was like crazy makeup and everything. I hope that lady's okay. She was awesome to me. She loved me. But like in an old folks home, I can't remember what statistic or what like who did the study, but it was like they have the most like spread venereal diseases.
really?
Uh, yeah, like most like that's like the hot spot or the hotbed for like STDs being transmitted because they are all bored, so they all just do the nasty.
Oh,
But we had a fight one time of two old guys because they were both messing around with the same lady, and it was the slowest punch I've ever seen in my life.
just
It-
it was like slow motion, but not.
yeah, I could tell like they thought it was fast, but it was not, and we had to like not like break up, push them back, but we had to be like, all right, like you come sit down.
Yeah.
And then they were like yelling at each other from like across the restaurant, and like 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 the head nurse and manager of like the entire place had to like come in and be like, "What's going on here?" And he's like, "He slept with my woman." It was nuts, dude. That place was crazy.
Yeah, that sounds
Uh,
bizarre.
we I don't think I had like normal like obviously you have like some normal coworkers, but like there was always like two or three like just oddballs that you're like, how did you get hired? Ugh.
Anyways,
Yeah.
uh, anyways, performance stocks. Uh,
Yeah, I think we talked our shit. Let's
what?
talk some
Yeah,
shop.
yeah. This is a good smooth transition into my first topic. Um, it'll be interesting to get your take on this because I know you are involved in recruiting now, being the sport coach for sprints.
Hmm.
But what do you think is the role of like a performance coach in recruiting, especially at the college level? Because I feel like, the typical spiel is you talk to recruits, all right, this is the weight room, this is what we do. And a lot of times that's about it. But I know they're a little bit bigger part of the process within certain sports and probably at certain schools. But what I've been thinking about lately, just like getting a tiny peek into like the scouting department here with the Cubs. And it's like, okay, some of this stuff, like could potentially relate to college too. Um, but where do you think the role of like a performance coach is in recruiting people at the college level?
I think, like you said, it does depend on the sport, but I think it also depends on the school and the coach that you're dealing with. In like football, basketball, and baseball, like the monetary sports, they obviously probably play a bigger role. They probably do like a pitch because they have maybe a junior day or something where they're going to bring a bunch of athletes in. They talk to the head strength coach, stuff like that. Um, but then I think it really comes down to like the head coach of the team or the coach that's recruiting them actually. Because in some situations, it'll be, hey, let's go check out the weight room. You'll be in there for 10 minutes and they'll talk to you. They'll tell you what we do inside the weight room. You'll kind of take a peek, and that's kind of the end of that. So I've had that in my career. And then on the flip side, there's also been where it's like, hey, why don't you come out to dinner? Because, like in track and field, your sport is training. So, like, it's all one big picture. So you actually go out to dinner, you talk to the athlete, and you see it from that side. Whereas the coach is probably going to, then you kind of reconvene afterwards and you're like, did you see anything? Did you like them? What do you think on like the frame? Do you think like there's going to be a weakness or think this, that, or the other? But at the same time, you're also talking to them, like helping sell the program, which is, you kind of get a little bit more involved, especially in like this scenario where you're active in the recruiting, even though you're not the one maybe like calling the athlete, texting the athlete, setting things up, that kind of thing. You just, when you get called in, it's like you're in and then you get to step back, which in a perfect world, that's probably what it should look like, to where what's coming in versus being blindsided with like day one. You see a whole bunch of new bodies and you're like, what's going on here? Um, it does help in that sense. I think it can be a difference maker when, like, even in a smaller program, like say for ours, at Elon, when an athlete comes in for their visit and they see that everyone's trying to meet them, it does make the athlete feel more important. It does make them feel like, hey, everyone wants you here. It's not just this coach, that kind of a deal. So it can help them make their decision. So that's a really cool thing, I think, in that aspect. Um, but then there's like other times where it, like I said, it's just like, hey, we're going to stop in the weight room for 10 minutes. You'll talk to the coach for 10 minutes, which is, I think, it's the more common thing that happens. However, in the grand scheme of things, a lot of the times those kids will spend more time with the strength coach or the performance coach than they will with their actual head coach, depending on, how long their off season is and stuff like that. So they should play a little bit more of a role, at least when the visit happens, just so they can get a feel for that and understand a little bit of like who they're going to be with and who they're going to be around versus like getting dropped on them. But I would imagine it's on the scouting side in pro ball. You can correct me if I'm wrong here. I would imagine a lot of is like the physical capacities and looking at that stuff, especially like at the higher levels, like in pro ball for you guys, where it's past the, an eye test, and it's like you're running through them through testing parameters and kind of going through that stuff. Whereas we can't really do that in the NCAA. There's no like tryouts on visits outside of like I think football, or like if baseball does like a camp or something like that. Like we can't like be like, hey, get on there and do a jump. I want to see what you have. Um, that's technically like impermissible by the NCAA, and which is a good thing because that way kids just don't show up, be a lab rat, and if they don't hit the number, they lose their recruiting. Um, it's so weird, especially in like this time with like the different roster limits that people have, the NIL, which whether or not people want to turn a blind eye to it, it does play a role because someone might someone might not go to like a mid major and take a full ride scholarship because they're going to take a 25% because they have the hopes of getting an NIL deal and becoming big. And it's just that information it's not ironed out, and it's not a thing that people understand as much as they could, because the information is just not out there. But it's everyone has this idea that they're going to go there, they're going to get a full ride, and then they're going to get $30,000 cash to be an athlete. And there's only so many schools that genuinely do that. Like I think there's only like 5 fully funded track programs in the entire NCAA, whereas every other one of them is, hey, you're probably getting that, like you could get a full ride if you are a really good performer, but like there's probably have like 2 or 3 of them on the team. Everyone else is probably like a partial scholarship because you have X amount that you have to divvy up and be able to roster an entire 45 roster athletes. So it's just so weird. And as a strength coach, I guess I didn't understand like how grateful I was in the situation to not have to like worry about some of that stuff. And now that I do, it's like, oh my God, this is a lot.
It's true, but you also kind of get to build your team to an extent. Like, that's that kind of the trade off. Like, you get to hand select, and like obviously they have to agree to commit to Elon, but you're like, oh, you've probably had people in the past where you're like, oh, I probably wouldn't have gone after that type of athlete to begin with if I knew if I was in charge of the
Yeah,
recruiting process, or I would have looked at this type of,
that is true. Like that's the downside. God, I have so much mucus. I don't know why. But like you do get to handpick like the athletes that you want to work with. So that is like the nice thing. The difficult part is sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes your dream athlete is out of reach. Sometimes you get really lucky, like I did this like past year with like getting the exact athletes that I wanted to bring in, which helps because like going into your training, you know you have exactly what you want versus like having that question of like, why did X person get recruited? You know, you don't have that. It's more of, you know, this is a fully curated by me team in all aspects of training. That this is like they're the athlete, they fit my like prototype of what I would be looking for to train the way that I want to do to be successful. So you can really do that and it does benefit you. It just takes a lot more work, and for me, didn't realize how expansive like that piece was. It's definitely made a situation better, but man, is it's 24/7 nonstop. Like you can go on vacation, that's fine. You're probably still doing it. Like you're still
hmm
working on that. And that's what people like don't understand.
how
That
does that work when you're recruiting international athletes? Like, are those people like, are they already moved to the States and they're looking? I mean, it's probably different if they're transfer in the portal, but like,
yeah.
if you have a freshman coming in from, Europe, European athletes, how did you even find those people?
Yeah, so that's a weird one because there's websites out there that have like essentially recruiters. Um, and the recruiters will kind of get in touch with you. So they'll email you and say, "Hey, I have about 5 athletes that are interested in coming to the United States." Sometimes they'll tell you, normally what they'll do is they'll give you a short bio of the 5 different ones. Here's their times, here's their intended major, here's their GPA, this kind of that and the other. And then what a lot of them will do now is they'll say this is their budget. So it's like they can pay $15,000 for school. So it makes it easy, but it makes it more difficult because a lot of the times they'll tell you, hey, they can pay their budget's 3,000. It's like,
I work at
well, that's
Elon.
like that's like a full ride basically. So you have to
Yeah.
offer them. So like the time has to match that, and some of them are far like, a 13-second 100-meter girl is not going to get a full ride at the Division 1 level. That's just not possible. So you just kind of like, I don't want to say you toss that to the side, but you're just like, that's not going to be something I can recruit.
Right.
Versus seeing the same person with a more expansive budget with an 11.6, you're like, that's a gimme one because they're interested. They kind of tee it up for you as like, this is an interested athlete, they're within our budget, they are within that time. And now it's like you really just kind of contact them through email, through text message, phone, whatever it might be. And it's like, all right, well, kind of when I'm approaching this conversation that you're probably going to get something because you've already listed some kind of budget, as well as like the fact that you fit within our time. So the conversation progresses a lot faster. So versus like a United States kid where it might be like they fill out a questionnaire or you reach out to them, start to generate a conversation, and then that background information kind of comes on down the road, maybe after your first initial offer and they're like, well, it's a little expensive, like I don't know if I can afford that, and then you kind of have to go back and that is more drawn out. um, the other nice thing about internationals is they don't always do a visit, um, which can help and it can hurt you. So it's like, having other materials to be able to give them of like, this is what the school's like, this is what it is. You might wrap that process up in a month or two versus 6 months of courting and an unofficial and official visit, this, that, and the other. Because they give you that background information, it's like done like that. And then once they commit, they apply, they take the application to like their, I don't want to say like not their embassy, but like their essentially government, and they get a visa. So they get, I think it's like an F1 visa, and they're good to go. So it puts a little bit more on the athlete to do for themselves, but it makes it way easier on the coach. And then like some other countries, like I think Kenya just had a thing where essentially they would do like a giant meet and they would have like distance runners show up, and then once they show up, they run their time, they get basically graded like A, B, C, D, E, F, and then they go reach out, and then they would come over to America to get trained. But they would use like the NCAA system as almost like a farming system to go train their athletes and then bring them back to bolster their national team.
Yep. That's what happens a lot
Which,
of times, though. I mean,
yeah,
you see a lot of the big time, whether it's sprinters or distance runners that are winning, the SEC championships or the national championships, and then they go back and might win an Olympic medal for their country. But a lot of times,
mhm,
it's not always the United States.
yeah. Even though they trained essentially
Right.
With the United States coach in the United States for 4 or 5 years, and
Yeah.
they just go back and capitalize on it, which
Exactly.
it's a
You play.
necessary evil.
Yep. You play the game.
Yeah, and I know like there's there's a lot of politics involved with like stuff like that, to where I believe like Qatar now is essentially like looking to bolster their athletics program. So a lot of these like Kenyans can go up and they're like, say, because I think there's like a block with Kenya to like get that F1 visa because people had been doping or someone had faked their age to be able to get into the system, whatever it is. So like there's like a limit on it, how many they can do or something like that now. I'm kind of speaking out of my ass, but at least this is kind of like what it sounds like, is like there's like a limit or they don't allow it as much. So they'll go get citizenship in another country that does allow it because that country wants to bolster it. So like Qatar, for example, they want to bolster their athletics program. Well, they'll bring in, say, like someone from Kenya or something, give them citizenship in Qatar. So when they come back, they'll compete for Qatar, but they'll get them that F1 visa to come over to America as a Qatar citizen instead of Kenya, even though they really are Kenyan in this example. And they'll come compete, do all that stuff, and then they'll go back compete for them, which helps the kid because the kid now gets to compete, and Qatar benefits because now they bolstered their athletics program, and that team reciprocating on the United States side, whether it be in the NCAA or whatever, now gets a great athlete who's going to come over here and kind of perform. It's such a weird thing, and it's very political, and there's a lot of like money that changes hands. Not necessarily like in the NCAA side, but like on the other side, to get them to get them over here because of different rules, regulations, laws from bad apples who don't do something or do something that's inappropriate necessarily, to whether it be faking age, or some people, like I said, have gotten in trouble for doping. So they essentially swap their citizenship to a country that's willing to do that to get that help. So it's such a weird thing. It's a wild west, and like you'll see, in the track and field, where like so many of the coaches like know about it, that like you'll be in, whether you'll be at a meet or just having a conversation with somebody, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's so and so. They changed their citizenship to this to get over here, and it's like you think of it as like this wild thing that like you just can't fathom actually like occurring near you until you see it, and you're like, oh my god, so like people are actually doing it.
Yeah, it's yeah. The likewise, I feel like the international market in baseball is like it's kind of insane to
Mm-hmm.
be honest. Like the lengths, because I mean, like people, like we take for granted, like if you're born in the U.S., like you just kind of have it made to a certain extent, and like
You
you
kind of
didn't
win
have
the
to.
lottery in that
Yeah,
sense.
it is. Like you didn't have to do anything for that. But like all these other like there's a lot of hoops that these international athletes sometimes have to jump through, and like even like for like an extreme example, like Cubans, like obviously like baseball is big in Cuba, but Cuba, given their their government, like if they want to play, like obviously Cuba has a baseball league, but then if you want to try to play for an MLB organization, like you essentially have to defect. So then, like once they leave, they can't really come back. So that's
Mm-hmm.
like an extreme example of like, okay, like if you leave, you can't go back. You're probably not gonna, if your family's still there, unless they also decide to leave, you just may not see them for a long time. Um, and then that affects like how much they can potentially get paid, and like there's a lot that goes along with that. And even other countries too, like just think about having to like they have to have a visa to come to here to DR, like if they're from another country like Colombia, Venezuela, and then you have to have a different visa to get into the United States, which is getting more and more strict now, as we know. So it's more and more difficult, and you just don't have
Mm-hmm.
to deal with that. Like if you're born in the U.S. So like yeah, the international market is insane. But anyways, back to like I don't know, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just thinking about that. Like, I guess this is a good like kind of spin-off question on that. Like if someone's both, I guess both in the sense from like an organization standpoint, like maybe within this visa stuff or like the international market, or within just day-to-day things. Do you see like maybe not necessarily with the Cubs, but like what are your thoughts on like necessarily I don't want to say favoritism. It's not really favoritism, but like that star treatment where like they might get a little bit more leeway, or like they're gonna try and like do a little bit more to get them there because they're a really, really good player versus like an average player. Like how much
I
of
mean
that do you
that
see like in an organization versus like even on a day to day like coaching stuff?
for me, like the coaching, I don't think it affects the way that I coach because I don't know. It might affect the way, and I'm not watching other people coach a lot because I'm usually busy during that time. So like I don't want to really
Yeah.
speak on that. Could definitely happen. For me, it's like okay, like especially when we're down here, maybe I would look at this different if I was at a higher level. But like you're down here, like you're at the lowest level. Like everyone's got to start here. You need to train like everyone else. You need to do things in the right way like everyone else. Like, yeah, I know who you are, but like that doesn't affect me of like, okay, I'm gonna give you special treatment. Like if you're, you know, I'm not gonna like give you more respect because of you got a big signing bonus. I'm gonna give you more respect if you show me respect. You work hard. You try to do things well. Stuff like that. But I think it can definitely affect, and a lot of this stuff is above my pay grade, so I'll just say that right now, like I'm speaking out of ignorance in that standpoint. It probably comes down to a little bit of like, okay, if you pay someone a lot of money, you have the expectation that they're going to return a certain amount of value. So I would think it would be a little difficult to not be a little bit biased as far as like a sunk cost type of bias or fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, ideally you do your work up front, and the people that you pay are the ones that tend to be better in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you could even definitely say that like extra attention is warranted to those people if you have money invested in them. And I think,
Because you need it to pan out.
yeah, like it just makes sense. And I think for me, it's not as important because it's like, okay, the weight room is more general, but I think probably, maybe if you're looking at like skill side, you're probably going to want to pay, if you're the director of a department and you paid someone, you gave a lot of money for this specific player, you want to make sure that that development process of that player is going as well as possible. And you're probably not going to pay quite as much attention to people that just got signed for the minimum. And, if they pan out,
And
great.
pan out.
Then like, and at the end of the day, like if you play well enough, if the player plays well enough, they're going to get noticed and they're going to get seen. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I look at it. Like we have guys that like weren't really like high on, what you can look up like the top prospect list every year for like and who they signed with and how much they signed for. And every year I mean, both years I've been down here, there's been guys that have signed for little to no, like very little money, and they've turned out to be really good players. And like we've sent them to the States. So I think if you play well enough, the cream rises to the top at the end of the day. They're not going to ignore you just because if you're playing well, they're not going to ignore you just because you didn't get a certain amount of money. So I think that evens out a little bit at the end of the day. But it's definitely interesting. I think I was talking to another coach the other day, and he had this really good line of essentially how we can try to bridge, the scouting side and then the development side, because the scouting works the upfront, and then once the person is signed, they don't have a ton to do with that player because their job is to find talent and get that talent signed. And then the coaches, once they're signed, there's our job is to develop that player. But he said this really good line of like we need to develop what we scout, but we also need to scout what we know we can develop. And I think that like stuck with me, because there might be some, and you probably run into this too, like okay, you're probably constrained by that the people that are the fastest people in the country are probably going to go to SEC schools, like,
Mm-hmm.
or you might run into a situation where you're like, okay, this person's good now, but like I don't know how much I can develop it. Like, for us, it's like, okay, with the coaches we have and like the outlook we have on development, we know that we can take this type of player and make them a lot better. This type of player that struggles with this, we haven't had as much success with, altering these things that need a lot of work. Maybe we're not going after that type of player as hard, or maybe we're not offering as much money. Um, so I think it all has to kind of work in unison. Like, I don't know, that line really stuck with me. Like, you have to scout what you can develop, and then once you get it, you got to develop what you scout. It can't just be a siloed approach. And I think it's tough to, everyone likes to talk. We talked about how difficult it is to have like a true high performance model, and it just gets more difficult the more moving parts you have. But like the more collaboration between departments is probably the better. So
Like I don't know. I love that line because it does frame the idea, like especially with when you think about like recruiting, like which is essentially college's version of scouting,
mhm.
to the aspect of like you can look at an athlete, and I'll again I'm going to speak from track and field from that being my expertise in this situation, but it's like you look at an athlete and you're like, all right, well their times are really great. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to like pull that. If it's a 400, you're not going to be able to pull that 2 to 3 seconds off, because if they're that fast right now, maybe they've already. I don't want to say they've peaked, but maybe their development has been pushed forward already. Is that someone that you're willing to take the chance on because you might be able to pull off a half a second? And is that enough to give them that money? Or, kind of go from there? Or is it a strength aspect? So me being both roles, like I can look at it from that point of like, well, maybe they're already really strong. So there's not much development there, but I need to make them more springy. And, just thinking of things like that to put it in the context of, is this player one we can bring in and continue to make better, right? Every coach believes that they can make any player better, and I think any coach who you talk to is going to say that. Like, I'm going to try and make every player better. And they kind of have to lie to themselves in that aspect, even if it's not true. But then you have to look at it in the sense of, like, when you bring somebody in, maybe it's a 5th year grad transfer. There's probably not much development going on. Like, is this player enough to make a move on it right now to be able to help us immediately in the short term? Or is there so much stuff that's, and the longer the career that they have left, the more room for development they have. But then you have to kind of weigh that within the possibilities. And especially in that sense of, grad transfer isn't going to take a partial scholarship to come do a master's program. They probably need a full ride, and you get the money turned over in the next year to get it back. But are you willing to invest that for the short term to immediately get those, the winnings, essentially, or that ROI? In the same sense, do you take a kid who may not have the best time, but you're looking at like how they're running and there's a lot of talent there, but maybe there's so much stuff to clean up that they just haven't had the opportunity or maybe the coaching in order to do so. So you can bring them in at a lower cost because, right now, year 1, year 2, they might not be that person, but 3 and 4, they're going to be. So all that has to play a role. And like, that's where, like, honestly, that's where film review and being able to see some of their races or their training workouts is a huge role, because you can start to identify some of those things. But then, like, when you visit, and this is where it's a good thing to bring the sports performance coach like in on the visit, where they can take a look at it, ask them questions, have conversations, and that gives you a better all around idea of that player's development or that athlete's development, to where it's like, all right, I can take the chance on this one because there's a lot we can do with it. Or the times may not be there, but like, they're probably not going to get there because we've maxed out everything in their situation to get them there. And then that's where you kind of play with it as like a roster piece, especially because, like, for us now, it's no longer just about the money. Like, with limits on rosters, like, those spots are at a premium. It's like we can't waste it necessarily, on a developmental piece for a lot of money, because we have to hope it can turn out, because we can bring in as many as we want. Whatever doesn't develop, we can get rid of later. That's not the case. It's like, you have to be able to be good immediately, and we can develop you, and it's going and we have a good idea that it will pan out. Because if it doesn't, like, we're kind of saddled with somebody. So, like, I think a lot of schools are a lot more picky with who they bring in and how they bring them in now, which changes the game. Knowing that you only have X amount of spots, it makes it easier and harder at the same time, because, I can only recruit 2 people. So I need to chase 2 really good ones and allocate the necessary resources to get there. But at the same time, it's like, I only have 2 spots. I need to make sure that these are the really good ones. So now you're fighting with someone who may have, the idea of going to a larger school. And it's like, well, now I almost have to sell them on what we have here, because it's going to be a better situation for them. And almost like kind of telling them, you can go be a small fish in a big pond, or a big fish in a small pond, in a sense of, you could come here and you could be an absolute superstar, and we'll help you, compete against all those people, and you'll have a really good shot to beat them. Or you can go there, feel good about yourself that you went there, and have some more resources at your beck and call. But you might be one of those players, like you mentioned, where they look at you and they say, well, we haven't had as much success developing this player. So you're on the team, but you're not necessarily like who they care about. So, like, that's it sucks. And what sucks about it is, like, it really, like, dehumanizes, like, the athlete. And I'm not a huge fan of that. But at the end, like, the hard part is, like, it's a non-negotiable. Like, at the end of the day, those things have to occur in order for someone to keep their job. So, like, when you come in, and this kind of reaches back towards, like, that favoritism thing of, like, I don't want to say my worst athlete, but, like, if you look at, like, non-point scorers, or, like, young developmental kids, like, they're going to get the same treatment as my top tier talent, who I know will go possibly win everything, because it's really the only way to level the playing field and, like, humanize everybody again, is like, hey, you're here, like, you made it. I wanted you here. I need you to be here because there's something there. So if you're having a bad day, you're going to get the same treatment of having a bad day as the top tier. And the top tier is going to get the same as you because now we're all on a level playing field. I don't care what you did. I don't care what you're on, in a sense of like, we're all right here. It's level now, whatever it may be. And the other aspect too of like, kind of going back into some of the like favoritism or special treatment, it's like you can you can easily feed an ego. It's really hard to take it away without like destroying some structure around that. So by if you give all of your say your best athletes just special treatment or favoritism in some way, they're going to feed like that's probably going to feed into an ego. I've seen it happen firsthand as an athlete, as a coach, to where that person thinks they're untouchable and they can do whatever they please because they know that they're valuable, whereas the other people may not feel as valuable, so they're going to do everything that's possible. And that's the ones that typically you'll see like in a strength coach be like, I love that kid because they come in here where they can control something and they just work, versus maybe the flip side is they come in, they don't care because they know that they probably are skillful in the sport. So that stuff it's such there's such a like dichotomy that you have to play with, and this like very interesting dynamic as a coach that it's a tough thing to deal with. And it unfortunately, whether anyone wants to admit it or not, I'll put my hand up and say it, like it's an emotionally taxing thing to do too, because you can be like, I think we got everything put together, and all of a sudden it falls right apart, or this, that, or the other happens, and then something doesn't pan out, and now all your fire alarms are ringing, and you're like, well, what do I do now? And that's just that it unfortunately kind of falls into the other duties as assigned that no one thinks about, and it's like you have to be prepared for it.
Yeah, I think the timelines for each are a little bit like that's big too. Like obviously in college, more or less you're dealing with a 4-year timeline. Obviously with COVID, that threw a wrench in that, and I mean it still can be expanded, especially in track. You can take a red shirt, medical, Olympic year, like you can be there for 7 years, but more or less we're talking 4 to 5 years versus like in like my situation, you're trying to predict like, okay, what's this player going to look like in 10 years, like 7 to 10 years down the road. So I think that makes it a little bit different too. Like you can afford to, and I mean, that's kind of the point is you want to find the people that like are going to have the most amount of room to grow and develop versus like college. Depending on what your situation is, you might want people that can step in right away, and that kind of depends on where you're at team wise at that point in time. And that's why people like to label people that peak. Some people peak in high school and then they get called like busts, but like it's just they were probably whether they were just like an early mature from a physical development standpoint, and they just reached their kind of close to their ceiling a lot quicker than everyone else. So they appeared like they were dominating, in high school, and then kind of just plateaued in college because other people that were kind of, late matures or a little bit behind the curve just ended up making up that space. And that's tough to know, especially with like NCAA. It's tough to, like you said, you can't just do like a full assessment on a kid when you bring them in for recruiting. You can watch the film as much as you want. Obviously, track, the times are going to be super important because that is the sport.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't, we're able to do a lot more here than you are there. So that's something that's tough to know. And I mean, I don't know what the answer is for that.
There isn't necessarily a super good answer. I think like as the timeline gets shorter and shorter and shorter, it becomes less about how high can you make the ceiling and more about how much can you raise the floor. I think that's a great way to kind of think about it, to where, you know, when they're a very developmental athlete, they're young, it's all these things that first coming in, it's like, we need to make your best performance as best as possible. And then to a certain extent, like that those gains will stop happening up at the top. So you have to then flip the script and say, how do I make you so consistent that your worst day is very, 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 very small margin from your best performance? And that's where you start to eliminate all any errors. And it's less about building athletic ability and getting those things to reach a peak to now saying, we're going to minimize the level of error that you have occur within, you know, your event, your sport, whatever it may be, to where now you're so sound that even if you don't pop off and have this massive jump again, everything that you do will be so similar to where I know that it's always going to be a consistent high level performer. Um, and that's a tough thing too on the side. You know, it's not necessarily a recruiting piece or a scouting piece, but it's now in the developmental game of how do we eliminate those mistakes? What is it? And you start to look less about these big picture things. And this is where good coaches can separate themselves, I think, is it's less about like these large chunks based off of athletic ability or speed or anaerobic power or whatever it may be, to now it's a very, very technical and skillful piece of this one thing now creates a potential problem. And it may not create a consistent problem, but a potential problem that could throw an error into something. We have to just absolutely grind to eliminate this one mistake or this one small technical error to now smooth out this process to where you won't and do it enough to be a subconscious action to not have to actively think about it to slow you down. But now it's just an ingrained movement pattern or whatever it is to now where everything flows. And that's where I think a little bit more of like in the early stages, the physical development, the technical development plays such a large role. And then in the mid range, it becomes a lot more about the physical and the tactical of maybe like a race model or something. And then the last piece, you know, when they're towards the end of their career, at least collegiately, like the game that you're playing is psychological and technical, because you go back to look at, was there something that is that something that we forgot? And then now, how are you prepping for this? And how do you feel about this? Because your hope is that they do something so much that it becomes second nature, whether it be throwing a pitch, being in a, you know, swinging a bat, throwing a football, tackling, running a race, that for them it becomes essentially another day in the office versus, hey, you're in a big moment and you're pissing down your leg. So you hope that that stuff naturally builds, but if it doesn't, that's where you have to intervene on that more psychological side of like, we need to expose you to these big moments to where you're not going to have that freak out because it's the first time you've encountered it. So how do I manipulate, whether it be practice, whether it be early season competitions, whatever it is, to where you feel like this is very important and we get you into a way that you can be successful. So now you know that you can be successful in that environment and you can replicate that. So those pieces of it, like I said, they play such a larger role as the development goes on that it's often forgot about. And you think, you know, outside looking in, especially as a young coach, you'll just assume you're like, well, this is what you want to do. This is what you're looking for. You got to go do it now, you know. Or they see someone who is so like ice cold in their veins that it's like it is nothing to them, and they're like, well, how do we get a player to get there? It's like that takes time. That takes deliberate action to get those outcomes, and it's not thought of enough on how you can, in my opinion, manipulate even just a practice to make those, I guess, like pressure situations occur to where they're exposed to that at least minimally to get that to be okay in those big moments.
Yeah, that's. I don't think I can add anything that's going to help what you just said. I think you talked about like raising the floor. I think that's also important. Obviously, is it better to recruit just the best athletes over like in track? Because to a certain extent, like, okay, you can make everyone better. It's just going to be to a varying extent. But if you bring me a bicycle and tell me to make it into a Ferrari, that's a little bit taller task than like, all right, someone that's already, you know,
then paint that bicycle.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you, you know, I think it's
I,
probably a little bit different because, like, I don't know, baseball, it's like, okay, ideally, like, you want good athletes, but it's so skill dominant. I mean, you see it all the time, even in the big leagues, like guys that like they look like normal people, or they look like out of shape people, and they're just killing the
really
game.
good.
Exactly, because it's like, can you swing it or can you throw? It's probably a little bit different in track though. Like you're not gonna, but you're probably not getting noticed in the first place if you're not already at a certain level of athleticism, I guess.
Yeah. And what I like to do is find someone who is relatively skillful with a large athletic potential. Um, and I think what a coach needs to do is identify their skill sets, and then that helps them recruit. Are they a very, very skill oriented coach where they're analytical of like the biomechanics and the physics of what's going on to where they can understand that's how to make someone better? Or are they great at building athleticism? And the most dangerous coach is the one who can do both, but they're few and far between. Um, so it's just knowing where your skill set lies, and then you recruit the counterpoint to that to help build that stuff. And that's how a lot of it should be built. Um, the problem is when you recruit the one that you're good at, but that's what they're already kind of peaking towards, and now you're kind of sitting there going, "Oh shit, what now?" And you don't have necessarily the skill set to go, so they're kind of just hammering down on one thing, and it's like, well, someone's not getting better, at least to the extent of they should be growing because you're hammering on the same point and you're just giving it too much of a good thing, and then that's when you get into trouble. Versus being like, okay, I need to flip the script and say, well, this person needs something a little bit different, and that's where, in my opinion, like your practice design and looking at that, that'll play a larger role of, you might subject your team and make sub populations of, well, they're very, and this is where I think, like, for me, I like to kind of build like a speed profile of like, are you acceleration dominant, are you max V dominant, or are you equal? And that kind of judges, 1 to 2 days in practice on where we need to move things, right? If you're acceleration dominant but you need max V work, you're probably going to do some max V stuff. If you're top speed dominant, we probably need to work on some acceleration, whether it be patterns, whether it be power, resisted, whatever it may be. But if you're equal and both are at a high level, right? Because you can always say you're equal but both are bad, or equal but both are good. If we're equal but both are bad, well, then we just pick one that we think we could use right now and rotate. If you're equal and both are really good, it's probably a tactical or a technical issue. So now that practice is less oriented towards the physical output, and maybe it's, hey, you need to learn how to disperse your energy to move efficiently throughout your race. So now it becomes a race modeling question. Um, but when you're recruiting that, I think the best way to do it, and I shouldn't say this, but we don't have enough people watching us. But like when I recruit, I'm looking at someone who's relatively skillful, but there's some errors that I can change to get more out of, but a good athletic ability, right? So like that's 60 to 75% on both towards the 100% scale. If I can get somewhere around there, I know that I can get them to grow technically and tactically, and I can grow that physical development, and then later down around that psychological. But there's already enough on there to be impactful immediately, to where I know that even if you're impactful immediately, I can make you really good. Um, Based off of the trend and track record of making someone who may not be even that and getting them to be at that level, right? Where it can get a little tricky is when you accidentally stumble on someone who is very technical, very tactical, very athletic, psychologically fortress, and somehow they love what you have to hear and they come to you. Now you have to sit there and go, I need to elevate my game in order to get them there. So now it goes back to like the coach of like relearning new things or experiences, whatever it is, in order to get that newest and best one, to try those advanced methods or whatever it may be to get them in that zone. So the hardest thing is it's constantly a moving goalpost. And you can come into, say, like, your recruiting season doesn't necessarily end. You may wrap up a year, of like, well, I've wrapped up my 2026 recruiting, but now I'm starting on 2027. So you just restart the cycle as soon as it goes. The goalpost moves. It's never done. But even then, it's like once you have those athletes in, it's like that goalpost may have moved because you gave them their off-season workouts after they've signed, and they killed everything. And it's like what I was expecting you coming in is different than what you were, whether you did or didn't do it. Like I have to essentially go back to the whiteboard and start redrawing because this isn't what I was necessarily expecting, whether it be good, bad, or ugly. So now you have to formulate everything all over again. And it's just the work will never be finished. The work will never be done. The goal is that we can get as far as possible within the time that you have here. And it sucks because you can hit and every athlete will tell you the same thing. It's like once they hit their PR, it's never going to be, okay, cool, I made it. It's the PR now moves. And it's like, well, I hit this. Now I want to hit this. It's like, all right.
Yeah, I can't add anything to that that's going to improve on that. Do you have something you want to talk about? Otherwise, I got another topic that I think could finish us off. Pause.
You want to finish me up?
Man, it's been that kind of episode.
It's been one of those.
It's been one of those days.
Why don't you finish me off, Chris?
Oh, wow. Okay. To finish this episode. Okay, so continuing ed is obviously something that's like important for everyone, regardless of job. But I think especially when you're talking about maintaining a sort of certification like the CSCS or for whatever it is, if you're an athletic trainer or every certification kind of has their requirements to maintain that licensure, whether you like it or not. Where do you think people go wrong? Because we've all seen this, people with the whole alphabet behind their name of like lists of different certs and like credentials. I feel like sometimes we get like addicted to like continuing ed. And like where there's definitely a point where it becomes too much like consumption and not enough application. But it's also tough to discern because like, okay, there's a lot of good stuff being put out there, but you can drown and like you can spend all your money on all these courses and all these books, and which ones are like actually worth it, and how do you balance consumption versus application. And it's also important to note that like a lot of times these things can kind of, they do shape the way that we look at how we do our job, whether that's people that are really into like PRI or people that are really into FMS or people that are really into a certain school of thinking from a course that they took. How do we not go too far down that rabbit hole and remain open-minded and kind of find that balance?
That's a tough one. It is tough.
It is tough because it's like I liken it to like nutrition. Like everyone has to eat, so you can't just say, "Oh, I'm gonna lose weight. I just won't eat." Like you have to eat to stay alive. You have to breathe to stay alive. We have to do our continuing ed. We have to get our CEUs to maintain our certification. How do we make sure that we're not just doing bullshit? Because sometimes we find some really good, this podcast, we could consider that continuing education. I think we both do.
Yeah.
But the NSCA is not going to give us a goddamn thing towards our CEUs for our CSCS. We may have to, and I think there's a lot of good information out there with like people that have done courses and have got those like CEU certified, but there's also some stuff that's kind of like I'm kind of over it.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a hopeful answer and a pragmatic answer. The hopeful answer is you're able to pick and discern enough information that qualifies for your CEUs to continue your certification that you can also directly apply and it helps you in your current situation. That's the goal. That everything that you're learning is something you want to learn, will apply very soon or in the near future. And it also gives you the credits in order to keep your certification. The pragmatic answer is half the shit that you need to do to keep your certification is stupid. Um, and it's usually a money trap in order to get money funded back to those organizations, whatever it might be, whether it be attending a conference that is probably talking about stuff that you already know if you're doing enough continuing education. Like I know, for example, like there was another conference that literally the entire conference, every speaker was talking about the same exact thing. We don't need to hound on the same thing. It was accentuated eccentrics. And we don't need to do that. It's not something that we need, 1 hour on it. And then if you need to go find some more information, there's enough information on that. But it was giving out a 1.5 CEUs or 1.8. So like, you kind of got to do that. You pay the $50 to go and you sit there and you have a good lunch and maybe you network and make some use of the time. But you do enough of that to get your credits because about 50% of what you're going to want to know doesn't necessarily have the accreditation to get the CEUs. So you do what you must, whether it be some of the online learning quizzes, which aren't always the best, but like there's always good nuggets in there. Like I've never worked necessarily directly with swim teams or swimmers, but they were talking about the range of motion and activation with a dip for the pectoralis major on how much of the motor units are recruited during that range of motion. Right? There's a little golden nugget in there saying you don't need the full range of motion for the extenuous growth for hypertrophy. You really need about 50% to 60% range of motion. You put that into practice though, and are you really going to be out there trying to measure 50 to 60%? No, you're going to say about halfway down is about all you need. You're good to go, move on. The big thing that most people will forget though is that, again, not everything you're going to do is going to get you to that point of either accreditation or true learning. So you need to do what's necessary to hold your certification and then find the information that is valuable to you to directly apply. Regardless of both situations where people get into trouble is they just overconsume information, like you said, and they never have any application of the information. And that's the textbook dorks who have read every book in the entire world but have never coached a damn person. Those people kill me because that's the same person who will take triphasic and do it with a 0.75 body weight squatter. It's like you need actual training to set yourself up. You just want to apply shit to show that you're smart, and that's the problem. Mm-hmm. In our world, hopefully chasing another certification in the sense of like I'll give you an example. Like for me to be a track coach, got to have your USATF or a USTF CCA, right? One of those two things hopefully gives me some information to make me a better track coach while also qualifying me to move forward. Is that necessarily the case? Because some of it you've already learned through actually just coaching and being under someone who maybe had that, and you learn a lot of it, but now you hold the certification. Yes and no. Or like in the CSCS, right? A lot of that information is, for lack of a better term, outdated from this point because it's less about the sets and reps and your tonnage that you progress and the time under tension and all the stuff that we've already learned about, whether we just watch is Mike Israetel or CBum on YouTube talking about the same thing on how to get that point, but no one's studying that. And a lot of their stuff and a lot of stuff that gets accredited is stuff that has been studied in a sense of it was an actual study. And shout out Josh Newman, our boy, who was on 2 episodes ago. The studies that you're reading are 5 years old because it's not, you do the study and it gets published immediately. You have to go through a publishing aspect and it takes about 4 years to get that done. So the information that they're making you learn is outdated information when there's new stuff out there that you can't get a hold of, or you can't necessarily say it's scientifically proven and I can get credit for learning this. It's just continuing ed because it's something that you're interested in. It's it's a very, very broken system in the effect of what you want to know and what is pragmatic to know necessarily isn't the things that they want you to know in order to hold your certification. But they're banking on the fact that the people who are going to be good need to hold that certification. So they're going to continue to hold it. And then they're going to sell a lot of people on the fact of like, well, that's how they learned was the money spent ones that get them the credits. It's not the other stuff. And it sucks. I'm not gonna lie. In an industry that constantly that bleeds money, to constantly have, and I understand where a lot of people come from, where they make their own courses or their education practices to sell to somebody else because they're looking for money too. But then you think about it, it's like, well, I got to pay $150 for that, and I want to learn that information, but I got to pay 250 to go to this conference or do this thing to get my certification or hold my certification. It's just that's a tough spot to be in, and there's no I don't see a right or wrong answer without a third party auditing of what's relevant, what's not. But then all you do is create another branch of a money pit to do the auditing. So it's like there's no proper way in or out of this other than live in this current hell and welcome to it, man.
What an optimistic view. I love that. That is, I mean, shit, that's the truth though. And how many times, like, I mean, shit, I've done this too, like, because it's easy to like just want to keep like reading the latest book and like consuming that stuff because it's like you're learning, so it gives you this aspect of, oh, I am learning, but at the same time, like it's comfortable because you can just like it's easy to
Read.
do. You can do it. You can do it wherever. I can watch a video whenever. Like, and how many times I feel like this is something that we fall into too is like a new book comes out or a new course, whatever, and we do it or read it just because everyone else is like, oh, you got like you
You
may
got to
not
read
even be,
this.
yeah, it's like you may know whatever that's about. You may know that subject well already, or you may just not even be interested in it, or it couldn't maybe it's not super applicable to you. But sometimes we just happen to do that anyway. I think
Hmm.
that's another trap like people kind of fall into. So one thing that I've been thinking about doing is like, whether you're for annual plans or against annual plans, if you're in the industry, you know what they are. We make them for teams, but like making one for yourself as far as like skills that you want to try to work on throughout the year, because a
Where
lot
are
of
you
times,
at
I
with
mean,
that?
yeah, like um because I think a lot of times it is spontaneous, which is has its pros and cons. Like your interests are probably going to change over time, and you don't want to
Hmm.
just be like, "Oh, I have to read this book because people told me that's There's some people that say like, "Oh, if you haven't read the classics, you don't, you need to read Super Training front to back and Starting Strength and like all these books that probably have some good nuggets, but like maybe you just don't need that right now." But kind of annual planning your continuing ed, if that makes sense, and looking at it from like a skills perspective. Okay, like I want to be able to do this, and maybe it's not even necessarily like, I feel like a lot of, I'm surprised honestly they don't do CEUs for like stuff like, I don't even want to say like coding and like being able to build certain dashboards like on Excel, because that's super pertinent to like what we do. I know a lot of people like I know are trying to learn how to like use R or use Python to make like dashboards, because you can kind of teach yourself that by watching YouTube or like just getting like a taking a little course on like data camp. But like looking at it from, okay, by the end of this year I really want to be able to like do this skill or like know this topic really well and know how to implement it, instead of just being like, all right, need CEUs. Oh, this conference will get me all of them in one foul swoop. Let me just do that. I guess just being like a little bit more intentional with that, as opposed to, okay, what's the cheapest way I can get all my CEUs and still maintain my cert? Because you have to do the CEUs regardless. Trying
Hmm.
to find more like an intentional way of like, okay, let me make sure I actually get something out of this. So that's something that I've been kind of thinking of. I don't know if it's a stupid idea or if it actually will work, but I think I'm gonna try it out.
I think that'll be something I kind of look into for like the following, like 2027 or
Yeah.
2026. Sorry, fuck. But like, I've had like the big ass calendar on my wall behind me, just hanging out behind me. So for those of not not viewing literally says big ass calendar. But stuff like that is like checkpoints where it's like, I want to have this done, this done, this done, but I haven't. So like it's been more so of important dates or like key reminders for things like that. But to do that with like your continuing education of like, maybe I want to have X amount of books read by this date, or at this point, like I'm planning out, like you had said, like what if it was learning R or Python? Like have that, that essentially skill wrapped up by June and things like that. You'll probably be able to A, space it out, and B, get away from over consuming and let yourself digest and apply the information by spacing it out a little bit more. Or for the people who just have 40 years of, or have 1 year of experience 40 times, it would hold them accountable to actually continue to learn and grow. So I think it could be good on both senses. Burp.
Yeah, and I think it kind of limits, like if you just tell someone to like, if you don't put a limit on it, you're gonna be like, okay, I mean, you might be all over the place with like, okay, let me read this book, instead of just being like, okay, within this narrow topic, I'm gonna go, all right, the next 3 months, that's all I'm gonna try to consume. Anything outside of that, and try to kind of be off limits and really actually try to take a take kind of a deep dive into a certain subject.
Yeah. And it just gives you the opportunity, like you had said, of instead of trying to learn 5 things at once and chasing 5 different rabbits, I'm honed in on this one skill to perfect it to then move on to the next. Same thing you do with practices. You know, not every practice, I mean, a bad practice is you do everything all at once all the time and then nothing gets better. But then you start to break things down and isolate them. If we do that for our athletes and that's how we develop them, why don't we change that and use that to develop ourselves?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Like we all know what that is, but like, I mean, shit, this goes back to my time at Simpson. Like, Coach Schmidt's telling you to like, high low your life. Like we try to periodize for our athletes, but then when it comes to like not even our training, but like how we try to live, that kind of goes out the window. And I think there can be some useful nuggets in that you can apply on like a bigger scale. You know.
100%. You said it first, but I said it louder, so it was my idea, so I must be smarter.
Exactly. So yeah, that's I don't know. There's a lot of shit out there. There's a lot of courses. People are making a lot of money off them, which good for them. But there's
Discerning it.
yeah, discerning it. And like, I don't know. Do you ever see a world where, because I mean, the NSCA, my boss asked me this the other day. He's like, why do you think the NSCA is like, why are they in charge of the, like, why them and not some other entity? And like, my answer was like, well, I feel like they were just kind of first to the punch. Like, this is a fairly new field, and people weren't really regulating it probably at first, and they were probably just kind of first to the punch, and they've kind of just been in that driver's seat since the inception of the field of S&C.
I think a lot of it is that and the fact of like it became a fight for that control between the CSCCA and the NSCA. Um, and while the NSCA hasn't pushed the boundaries as much as we would have liked to further the field, it also didn't shoot itself in the foot by continuously hounding on the wrong things constantly, where the CSCCA did a little bit of that, and now they're doing a fairly good job trying to crawl their way out, but they've dug themselves a large hole. Whether that be, some of the Rick Court stuff with awarding him, his golden jacket after having a kid die underneath his, or having scandals, or some of these coaches who were part of that program but necessarily were bad actors. They didn't, unfortunately, within the public eye, they didn't do enough to ostracize that individual or remove their certification. They said, hey, they kind of did the we'll stick with you, but it wasn't necessarily like the monster with Tiger Woods where it's like, that's our guy, we're going to stick with him because we know it's not as bad. It's like, no, there was actual death.
Yeah.
you know um
Yeah.
but like you said, like NSCA was kind of first to the punch. Our field has really only existed since the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
with like Boyd Epley and Nebraska starting it. they hopped on the train and said, "Hey, we're going to regulate the quality," and now they are the controlling party in that sense because they were first in. They kept their nose clean in a sense of doing that, and now they're large enough to where they can they can control their own destiny. And it would, you know it's kind of like, not to get political, but it's kind of like essentially like how America has a two-party system and a third party can't really come into that because the two have grown so large. It's hard to enter in as that third and say, I want to compete too, because they can kind of just stomp you out
Mhm.
because their name and recognition is so large that it's going to be hard to fight that. um, and it's not necessarily, it's nobody's fault, really. I don't think there's anyone at fault. Or, you look at like a gas company where, Shell, BP as those kind of like, and then like you have, is it Sunoco that has the dinosaur? It's like they're there, they exist, but you see one every 450 miles. And it's kind of doing
Mhm.
its own thing, and it's never going to be the Titan, where the Titans are now established after 40 years. It sucks, but it's the truth, and that's the way it's going to be unless there's someone who can immediately win over public opinion, at least within the field, and provide what everyone feels is lacking and solve the problem that is apparent. It's not going to change.
Yeah, I agree with that.
On that note, should we wrap it up? Leave the people with
Yeah,
something depressing?
yeah. Let's leave on a sad note there. You guys can enjoy the rest of your day with that.
Yeah. Um, as always, thank you guys for watching. We really, really appreciate it. We got a good amount of subscribers, but we need more. We love you guys. We enjoy doing this every week. By all means, we're trying to bring on the best guests as possible to both further our own education and give you guys something fun to listen to. Follow us on Instagram at bevboys.tv for all of your clips, fun things, snippets of the episodes. We also have the link to the show in our bio so that way you can get a hold of it and watch the show fully on either Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Subscribe to us on there. Follow us on Instagram. You can follow myself at B Shakuski, BSZUTKOWSKI. That's my personal one, but you'll see Bev Boys clips as well as training content, anything like that. You can follow Frenchy Boy at
French_fit40 Instagram, Bev Voice clips, training clips, all sorts of fun stuff. So
he's been
bevboys.com.
buy
Get
yourself a
you a t-shirt.
shirt,
That's right.
t-shirt, a hoodie, a hat. We got hats on there. I want to see if we can get some socks. Bucket hats are in production for the mock-up right now, which I'm super hyped about. That's going to be something that's pretty big. Embroidered bucket hats. Get out there, get in the sun, pop that top on the beach with a bucket hat, or take it out on a golf course and chill out. Crack an energy drink for us. But as always, we love you. We'll see you in the next one.
Peace.
Peace.